Hi guys, and welcome to the third section of our animation training. So now that we've learned all the principles and all the techniques and all the methods and all the tools, we're going to put them to use. We're going to do a complete animation from beginning to end. And this is the animation that we're going to do today. It's a drop from the sky, land, jump up and do a side kick. Now I'm going to pause this right here and I'm going to describe to you what we're going to do. So don't ingrain this in your head too much. Now the character is going to drop from the sky and he's going to land into a cool pose, and then we're going to give him some life in his pose. Then he's going to jump up and do a powerful side kick, and then that's the end of our animation. So why don't we stop talking about it and let's start doing it. So we have our character in the default position, so the first thing we're going to do is raise him up into the air, and since he's in mid-fall, he's going to be caught by air drag, so let's bring his arms up so they're being dragged by air friction. And now let's turn his fingers into a more neutral looking pose rather than a really flat looking pose. Let's do the same thing for the other arm. Let's put his fingers in a more neutral looking pose too. So let's tilt his head down so he's looking where he's going to land. And let's give his torso an arc so it doesn't look so asymmetrical. Give him a more dynamic looking pose. And that should be good enough for the first keyframe. So let's go to the next keyframe at frame 6. Spread out his feet so he's more balanced when he lands. Okay, scrubbing through, that's what it's going to look like. It's going to be hard to judge what it's going to look like this early. So let's spread out the feet a little more, fix the knee. Okay, let's straighten out his torso because of air friction. And let's straighten out his arms slightly more, so that we're saying he's at his fastest speed at this point in time. Okay. And this is a scrub through. Now go to frame 10 and we bring his hips down slightly more and arc his torso upwards so it's being dragged behind. And arc his arms back. They're being dragged still. Now when we scrub through, not quite sure what it's going to look like yet. It's too early in the game. Let's drag his head a bit. Okay, let's go to frame 13. 3 more frames ahead. And we're going to follow through with the torso. The hips are pretty much stopped. They're decelerated. The head is still dragging behind. The arms, let's see. Okay. Scrubbing through. It looks kind of weird right now. Let's bring his hips back a bit. There's like a whipping motion in the torso. We'll have to fix that later. Might be too quick. Let's bring his arms midway between a drag and a follow through, so the arms aren't moving too fast. Okay, we scrub through. Looks really awkward here. Between frames 10 and 13 looks really quick. So back at frame 10, let's bring part of frame 13's motion into frame 10 to lessen that sharp whipping action. Okay, let's bring him down in 13 to show more deceleration. There's a weird horizontal motion in the hips right now. So let's bring him back in frame 10. Okay. Let's move on to frame 16. The arms will be doing most of the follow through here, and his stomach and chest come to a halt. Let the arms flow back. And we scrub again. The drop seems kind of odd. What is missing is the contact point, the point where the feet touch the floor, and that's missing in our animation so far. So let's go back to frame 6 and make this keyframe the contact point. And this is the keyframe where the character just touches the ground. He's still dropping, but his feet just touch the ground. Okay, it looks better. There's better deceleration in the hips now. Let's drag the chest back more in frame 10 so we get more of a whipping action in the frames ahead. Okay, let's do the same for the stomach, add more drag. Okay. Let's add even more drag here. Before we move on, let's give frame 16 a more natural pose here. So let's arc his torso a bit, give his spine a more neutral bend instead of a straight-on pose. Let's readjust his head to the new pose. Alright, that's what it looks like so far. Let's move on to frame 21. And notice I go 5 frames ahead now instead of 3. And that's because our motion will be slower in frame 21. Things will come to a rest. Basically, I'm keying the entire body just by nudging each joint. This is using the auto key method. And this frame will be our moving hold for the land position. Now the right arm will be the active arm, so it won't drag too much. The left arm will be the passive arm, so it will drag back much more. Active means I'm exerting my muscles. Passive means I'm just letting my arm swing back without exerting my muscles. Okay, let's play back in real time. And notice that the torso still seems to be snapping down. We need to smooth out that area. What it looks like is the keyframes between 10 and 13 are too close. So I need to put more time in between them. In the dope sheet, slide the keyframes at frame 10 to be at frame 9. And in real-time playback, it looks better, but there's still a slight snapping motion. So back in the dope sheet, slide the keyframe at frame 9 to frame 8. Now we have 5 frames separating frame 8 and frame 13. Although it still thinks the keyframe is at frame 9, we can double check in our dope sheet and see that the keys are really at frame 8. So don't worry about that too much. In real-time playback, yeah, that's much better, much better. Now that we fixed it, the animation has a lot more energy, a lot more oomph. Follow-through looks good with some slight snapping energy. The character has weight. You can feel the weight in the upper body. Let's adjust his right arm to look stronger in the pose at frame 21. Let's play with the head posing. No, that didn't work. Let's bring it back. We want the head to have weight from the land and then come back to their normal position. Okay, make the right foot look more natural so it's not stuck in a perpendicular pose. After that, let's readjust the knee. Now, scrub from front view. Make sure you check your animation from all views. You might miss something if you don't. Okay, tweak the pose a little more. Adjust the left knee. Tweak the arm a little more. Okay, the pose looks good. I want the character to hold this pose for a while now. So let's skip ahead to frame 50. That will give us about 1 second of hold. Now I key the pose by just nudging all the major bones. By nudging instead of just hitting the key button, I can add a very slight motion to the pose, so it changes naturally and not mechanically. And don't forget to key the knee and feet targets. When I scrub, I can see that there's a slight motion during the hold, but the feet are really sliding around. To fix the feet from sliding, go in the graph editor and flatten out the feet targets for both translation and rotation. As you can see in the animation curves, that there's a slight arc from frame 21 to frame 50. So flatten out the curve for both keyframes. When we scrub again, it looks like the rotation is fixed, but the translation is not. So go back in the graph editor and flatten out the translation curves. We just did the rotations previously. Notice the same type of arc and curve in the translation. So select both keyframes and change their interpolation to flat. When I scrub now, we can see that the back foot is fixed. Now I have to fix the front foot. So select the keys and flatten the interpolation. Okay, in real-time playback, looks good. Feet are sticking, no motion. Okay, let's move on to frame 54. From here, I want the character to jump up. So first we have to add an anticipation for the jump. So I'm going to make the pose to be compacted in and also have the arms flow back. The arms are going to create momentum to help launch this character up. Okay, on scrub back, the right arm moves too quickly. So let's split the difference and bring the right arm back in halfway. Let's have the left arm move independently of the right. So let's pull this arm back even more. Let's go ahead 6 more frames because I want this anticipation to last a while so the audience will notice it. Pull the hips back to add the anticipation. Move the right arm back all the way to complete its anticipation. Crunch the body in a little more. Nudge the left arm back a little more. For these joints, I'm applying a moving hold for their anticipation. Okay, scrub through the animation. Let's pull the hips back a little more to give the character a bigger anticipation. Go to frame 54 and do the same so the anticipation starts earlier. So by the time it gets to frame 60, the hips going back should be slowing down. Okay, scrub back. Heck, let's make him more extreme. Let's pull him back even more. Now we're animating. Readjust frame 54. Okay, now he looks good. Now he looks like he's going to spring forward. The pose is more dynamic now. Scrubbing through again, the left arm looks a little static. Let's give it some motion. So frame 50, which is the end of our held pose, let's bend his arm a little bit. So when we go into anticipation, the arm has room to move back and doesn't look so static. In frame 54, let's bring the arm back slightly to give it more flow. Real-time playback. Okay, looks good. Let's move on. So go 4 more frames ahead to frame 64. Now the character will launch up. Move the hips up and move it forward. Right now he's only using his leg power to move himself. Let's start to bend the spine in the opposite direction to get that slingshot effect. Go back to frame 60 and make sure his clavicles are stretched back. This is purely for dynamic appeal. At frame 64, we're going to swing the clavicles down because the arms will be swinging like a pendulum. At this frame, they are not helping the jump at all. The hips are doing all the launching. But we'll be using the arms in the next keyframe as more momentum to help this character launch up. Okay, go 4 more frames ahead to frame 68. And the character's leg power is still launching his hips up and forward. Most of the work is being done by the left leg. The right leg lifts off the ground, so it can't really help. Now the arms start to become a momentum factor. Their weight and speed start to help the character propel forward and upwards. Okay, offset the arms so you don't get twinning. So make sure you bend the clavicles to show the weight of the arms and also flexibility of the chest. Let's make this keyframe the last keyframe the character is on the ground. So let's extend his left leg out till it's almost straight. Key the right foot target for frame 64 before we move on to frame 68. At frame 68, move the target up. The right foot is now active and will not drag behind. It's part of the lifting process now. Now we're going to fix the toe, go back to frame 64, and key the toe to make sure it won't change. Now at frame 68, straighten out the toe. Notice the toe animates slowly and doesn't really push off the ground. We need to add another keyframe between 64 and 68 to animate the toe pushing off the ground. So at frame 66, push off the ground with those toes. Real-time playback. So far, so good. Okay, let's move ahead 4 frames to frame 72. Arc the spine to its most flexed position. This is when the spine is the strongest. Accentuate the strength by looking his head down. Raise the character in the air. Now he's airborne. The right leg is still lifting with the body. Adjust the knee position to make it look stronger. Okay, the arms are now at their apex and stops giving momentum for lifting up. So eventually the arms will slow down. Still keep the arms offset from each other though, so we don't get that twinning motion. Key the left foot target in frame 68 before moving it in frame 72. Now at frame 72, the left foot target drags behind. In the front view, let's bring the left foot more to the center so the body is more balanced. We may want to extend the left leg some more to show that they just pushed off the ground. Uh-oh, we have a foot error here. Looks like I didn't key the foot target for rotations in frame 68. I just keyed for translations. So I'll just manually fix it in frame 68. Now it looks like I have to flatten the curve out for the rotations. Let's do that in the graph editor. Select the whole range just to make sure and flatten out the curves. Now the left foot is fixed. Let's move on. Go 4 more frames ahead to frame 76. Since I want to start twisting the torso now, I'll make sure I keyed the hips for the twisting in frame 68. Now in frame 76, I'll start twisting. The purpose of twisting is to eventually get the right leg in position for a side kick. So I want the side of the character aiming forward. At this point, the spine stops flexing and the character uses his abs to pull his hips in. Bring his foot up with his torso. In martial arts, we call this chambering. Like when you put a bullet in a chamber of a gun, it's ready to fire. When you chamber a foot or a fist, it's ready to strike out. So when you chamber a foot, the knee must be up and in. Let's bring in the other leg so the character gets in a tight ball. Okay, that's the beginning of the chambering, or the anticipation of the side kick. Let's move on to complete the anticipation. So go 4 more frames up to frame 80. Remember to keep his body moving in the same trajectory. Let's twist his hips back more and sideways to really get the side aiming to where the character is going to kick. Now for the rest of the spine, let's curve it and make it into almost a ball. Tweak the arms. The arms are somewhat loose right now. They're not really doing much. Aim the head. The head should be looking at where it wants to kick. Keep the left arm loose but in. Bring in the left leg. Let's really chamber the right leg, have it ready to shoot out. The left leg is the counterbalance of the right leg. Since the right leg is being chambered, the left leg should also chamber. Likewise, the arms should counterbalance each other. Okay, scrub back. Looks like the right foot needs to be chambered some more. I don't get that feeling that it's going to shoot out. Let's pull it in tighter, closer to the body. Have the heel aim out again. Okay, let's scrub back. Let's tilt the body back a little more so it's not so straight up and down. And then real-time playback. It's still not that dynamic when going into the crunched up pose at the apex, the chambered pose. It's kind of slow. So let's crunch up his body even tighter so we get a more explosive kick afterwards. Now he's pretty tightly compact. Scrub through. Seems to pop at the end. Less adjusted so it's not so tilted back. And he seems to travel horizontally too far at the end. So let's bring him back just a tad. Let's rotate him back up so we can see his head and face. Okay, that seems to work fine. Let's go to the next keyframe. Let's try 6 frames ahead and hold this pose for a little bit. So at frame 86, the character will basically be floating in mid-air for the same pose. Let's scrub through. Well, I was wrong. It looks like it's being held a bit too long. So let's go to Dope Sheet and shift those last keyframes back by 2 frames. And we want that keyframe to happen at frame 84 instead of frame 86. Okay, now we have the problem of the character traveling too far now. So let's translate him back a little bit. Oops, looks like I set those keyframes at frame 86. So let's go into the Dope Sheet and delete those keys at frame 86. And at frame 84, let's translate him back. Okay, it looks good. Now let's set keys for the rest of the joints in the body to hold this pose. Guess what? I did it again. I set all the keys at frame 86 and not 84. So let's go back in our Dope Sheet and slide all those keys to frame 84. Scrubbing through here, you can see that the rotation of the hips and torso is kind of rough. Let's find out the problem by looking in the graph editor. Nothing really obvious sticking out here. Let's just try to fix it manually. So tweak the hip rotations just a bit. That seems to work. Okay, let's keep on moving forward. Go 4 frames ahead to set the next keyframe at frame 88. And here, the character finally kicks. So let's straighten out his spine, extend his kicking leg, kick with his heel, counterbalance with the left leg, bring his head and torso up slightly so he sees what he's kicking. Extend his arms for balance also. Counterbalance both arms. Okay, that's a cool martial art looking pose. Let's scrub through. It looks okay. It's not explosive enough for me though. So let's extend his body out even more. Let's make the pose more extreme. So flex the spine out more, straighten the head a bit. Scrub through. Something is still off. I think it's because he stops traveling horizontally when he kicks. So let's translate him horizontally some more. Scrub through. Okay, maybe don't translate him over too far. Let's bring him back a bit. Let's straighten out his right leg some more to make it more extreme. Okay, with the left leg, we have to be careful about pinching because his angle is too far for this particular setup to handle. So just be careful about that. Let's bring the torso back up, make the pose more aesthetically pleasing. Okay, real-time playback. Let's play with some arm posing to try to make it more extreme. Nah, the arm thing isn't working too well. It's drawing too much attention to it. So let's go back to what we had. There's some arm bumpiness going on. Let's try playing with the left arm. Okay, let's get rid of the bumpiness. Let's try deleting one of the keyframes during the transition to the kick. Keyframe 84 seems like a good candidate. So in the dope sheet, select all the keys at frame 84 and then delete them. Now let's shift all the keys from frame 88 back down to frame 84. So our moving hold in the air is a lot shorter. Okay, real-time playback. Yeah, that's much better. Action flows much smoother. We have to fix a similar problem we encountered earlier, which is to translate him back horizontally a bit since we deleted about 4 frames from his animation. Scrub through. Yeah, it's looking good. Real-time playback. Ta-da! And that's it. That's our first pass at this jumping kick animation. What do you guys think? Not too bad, eh? Okay, the next steps we're going to do is to analyze it. We're going to critique it. Then we're going to go back and fix the problems and then add little nuances to make him look more alive. Then we're going to polish him up and render him out. Okay, let's review our first pass at this animation. It's not a bad pass. Overall, the first drop has good speed, but the jump up and the kick are lacking in energy. They seem to be almost slow motion. Also, we need to put more oomph on the anticipation of the jump. We need to add some life in the squatting pose in the middle and add some head acting, maybe some hand acting. It needs more hand animation throughout the entire animation to show some emotion. And since this is somewhat the camera angle I'm looking for, we need to balance out the squat pose for this angle. And also, we need to smooth out some arm motions in the air. Okay, so those are all the notes, and let's go ahead and fix our animation. The first thing I want to do is speed up the last half of the animation. So in a dope sheet, I'm going to shift all the keys closer together by one frame. Okay, on playback, it already looks much better. There's more energy in the jump and in the kick now. Let's take a look at the anticipation for the jump. I'm focusing on his head right now. I'm just seeing where the keyframes are at. What I want to do with the head is to have it scoop up to help lift the rest of the body off the ground. Let's make sure the head and neck are keyed at frame 61 so it won't change. Okay, delete the keyframe at frame 53. So at frame 57, we're going to dip the head down so it starts the scooping action. And why not at frame 58? Well, I want the scooping action to be offset from the rest of the body. I'll delete the existing head keyframe at frame 58. Scrub through to see if the scoop is working. It doesn't have that much effect on the animation. Let's push it to scoop deeper, make it more noticeable. Scrubbing through again, I'm not getting the effect I want. I don't feel that the head is really helping to lift off. So let's play around a little bit with the timing for the head. Let's look in a dope sheet and experiment with the neck and the head keyframes. Let's slide them so the neck and head scoop later, and this effect will be more of a head drag rather than a lead in with the head. It's not bad, it might work. But this gives us a sense that the hips move first, then the chest, then the head. The arms seem to be moving at the same time, so let's offset them a bit for a more organic looking feel. Let's take the left arm and offset it by one frame. For the elbow, let's offset it by 2 frames. Offset the left hand by 2 frames. And let's not forget the clavicle, so offset that by 1 frame. If you look at the top of our dope sheet, you can see that there are pretty much keyframes on every frame now. Our keys are hard to look at now, and that's why offsetting any keyframes should come towards the end of your work on your animation. Let's bend the arm at frame 50 so it has more distance to travel when it goes back. Okay, I'm checking the position from different angles. Let's play back. It looks better. Now at frame 21, let's try to match the arm pose that's in frame 50. Give the hand some flair. Scrubbing through. Looks okay. I think the held position from frame 21 to 50 might be too long. So let's slide all the keys from frame 50 back 10 frames to shorten the hold. Okay, play back. Actually, that's a little too short. It doesn't give the character enough time to think. He's just merely going through his motions. I want him to think before he jumps, to give him a little life. So let's try sliding all the keys to frame 45 and see what that's like. Okay, play back. It seems more natural now. He has enough time to think of what he's going to do next. Now let's give him some body language. Let's do a little bit of acting through his hands. So close his hand and turn it into a fist. Make him look like he's ready for action. Let's bend his fist forward to make it look like he's really clenching his fist. Okay, he looks stronger here. You can almost tell what his facial expression should look like. Let's figure out the place for the next keyframe for his fingers. In a dope sheet, you can see that there are some existing keyframes here for the fingers. For now, let's just remember that they are there, and let's not do anything with them yet. At frame 55, I'm going to open up the fingers as part of his anticipation for stretching back before leaping. Okay, it looks okay. Now as the hands go through swinging like a pendulum, I want them to tighten into a fist to help his hands accelerate and swing up. A good place to have a fist would be frame 58. So in a dope sheet, let's slide the existing keyframe and move it to frame 58. Now let's make the keyframe into a fist. Scrub through. The action looks pretty good. Let's check out the later half of the jump. So let's check out where the other fingers keyframes are. It's at frame 62, and just keep that in mind for now. The last pose in the animation is the last thing we're going to remember, so let's make it look cool. I'm going to play around with the hands to see what looks good. Maybe give him a kung fu pose looking thing. In our camera, it doesn't look so cool, so let's angle it a little bit more. Okay, it looks better. Let's bend the fingers a bit, make it more asymmetrical. Rotate it a bit more. Okay, that looks good. Scrub through. It looks fine. Now let's look at the right hand. So it should definitely close into a fist somewhere in the squatting position. Let's keyframe the fingers at the same keyframe as the hand. So at frame 21, I'll close the fingers into a fist. Okay, let's make the fist look stronger and bend it in a little. So somewhere before the fist happens, the hand should be open before he lands. Let's make it at frame 14, so open up the fingers at frame 14. Now when we scrub through, it looks a lot cooler. The hand clenches into a tight fist. Skip to frame 45 and close the fingers into a fist also. Then his fist will be closed throughout the entire squatting position. I'm just checking in a dope sheet where the keys are for the right hand, just to make sure we don't have any unwanted keyframes in there. Okay, now on the anticipation for the jump, We want the right hand to act similar to the left hand, so we have to open up the fingers and make them more dynamic. Frame 53 is where we want the fingers to be open, but let's check in the dope sheet to make sure that there are no conflicting keyframes. So during the jump, the fingers need to be closed in a fist to help with momentum. I think a good spot would be frame 57. In the dope sheet, let's check for conflicting keyframes. We see one at frame 58, so drag those keys to frame 57. Now in that keyframe, we could close the fingers into a fist. It looks okay. So let's move on to later in the jump. Over here at frame 62, the fist should be closed. So let's check in the dope sheet for conflicting keyframes. And yes, there is already a keyframe here, so we'll just adjust that keyframe then. So close the fist. And it looks good. Now for the rest of the animation, the fist should remain closed. Let's just make sure the fingers are keyframed on the last keyframe. Let's put a tiny bit more animation in this right hand. So in between keyframes 62 and 71, let's open up the fingers a little bit. You probably won't even notice it too much. There's some odd motion going on with the right arm in this area. So let's delete the keyframe for the right arm at frame 68 and try to smooth it out. As we can see that when deleting that keyframe, we lose some of the power and energy in the kick animation. Let's bring his arm back a bit to show some anticipation for that arm. Let's smooth out the elbow joint too. It's still a little bumpy in the arm area. Let's just delete that keyframe. I'd rather have it smooth than bumpy. In the dope sheet, we could see that we don't have keyframes in this area for the right shoulder, and the right elbow has one keyframe at frame 68. So let's smooth out the left arm and delete the key for the left shoulder at 68. Okay, it looks smoother. Let's do the same for the left elbow. Delete the key at 68. Okay, now both arms look pretty smooth. Here's our animation so far. The left hand pose isn't really working in the end. It's making the rest of them look wussy. So let's turn that into a fist and make him look stronger. Just make sure there are no conflicting keyframes for the fingers in that time range. Let's turn that hand into a fist and bend his fist forward. Make sure his wrist isn't twisted too far. Okay, it looks good. Here's the animation again. The right hand seems to be moving in the squatting pose. Let's make sure the pose is the same from the beginning of the squat at frame 21 to the end of the squat at frame 45. So we're going to copy the keyframe at 21 and paste it into frame 45. Wiggle it a little to change the pose very slightly. Okay, it looks like the same keyframe. Of course, we get this arcing motion in between. That's okay. It'll make the motion look smooth. Playback. Okay. I'm looking at the head right now before the anticipation. Now this is really nitpicking, but let's offset it very slightly. Okay, playback. Not much different, but we'll leave it. Let's play with the left arm a little bit, since it's predominant on the screen. Since the left arm seems to swing back pretty quickly on the land, let's delete one of the keyframes here. Looks like frame 16 is a good one to delete. So let's delete the elbow keyframe here. On frame 21, I'll bring the hand back a little bit more. Then I want to hold this arm position for a while. So let's skip ahead some frames. Let's go to frame 26 and key the arm in the same position. Now during the hold, the arm will bend slowly forwards. Actually, the hold might be too abrupt for the elbow joint. Let's delete the key at frame 26. Okay, let's keep the arm still moving and the swing back some more. So frame 26 will be the end of the swing. Now I want the arm to be held in this position for a short time. So let's skip ahead to frame 32 and make that the end of the moving hold. Okay, scrub back. Looks kind of wacky. Let's go back to frame 32 and delete the keyframe for the elbow joint and rekey it slightly back. Right now I'm just trying to smooth it out. It's still a little too much motion. On frame 32, I'll bring the shoulder joint down a little to make it less extreme. It's better, but let's make the hold a little longer. So in a dope sheet, let's slide the keyframe at frame 32 over to frame 36. In real-time playback, the arm looks kind of awkward. I think I'm going to have to shorten the hold then, instead of lengthen it. Let's move these keys down to frame 31. Okay, I'm just tweaking the hand to give it a bit of flow. It still seems like a loose door swinging around, so I'm going to make the arm stick out more and hold that pose tighter so it's not so loose. We'll be looking at the frame range from 21 to 31. In the graph editor, let's take a look at the curves in that frame range. The red and blue curves are relatively flat, but the green curve has an arc on it, so let's flatten that out a bit. Okay, let's play that back. As you will notice, the upper arm doesn't move so much. It remains still while the elbow does the moving. I think I'll delete this moving hold. I know we may feel like we wasted our time trying to do it, but sometimes animation is a trial and error procedure. Sometimes you might not know what you like until you see it. So by deleting the keyframe at 31, the elbow bend from frame 26 to 45 is much slower and more subtle. The arm still looks like it's in the air too much, So at the end of the squatting pose, I want to drop the arm down a bit to show that he's at rest, especially since his arm is bending at that point. Okay, it looks a little less awkward, but the motion is still not quite right. It's too noticeable. You know, I'm a perfectionist, so I have to get this right, even if it kills me. In the graph editor, let's smooth out the key for frame 45. Now the upper arm hardly moves through the squatting pose. Yeah, it looks better. The arm is tighter. It looks like he's flexing his muscles more rather than letting his arm swing around. Okay, let's keep going with the muscle flexing idea and bring his arm in a little more at frame 45. I know I'm obsessing over this, but let's make the arm totally motionless, and I'm going to like it. All right. Sometimes you have to say, it's not perfect, but it's done. And you got to know when to move on. Okay, let's put a little head acting in here. First, I'm going to make sure the head is keyed at frame 46, which is the end of the squat for the head and neck. So nudge these joints a bit. Now at frame 21, I want to rotate his head to the side a bit. I want him to look around first before he jumps to give him some life. Now let's hold this head position for a bit. So go to frame 30 and key the head for the same pose. Make sure the keys are relatively the same in the graph editor, so flatten out the curve. Go ahead 6 more frames and have him look forward to match the pose in frame 45. Okay, make sure the curves are somewhat flat in the graph editor so his head doesn't drift around. Let's play back. Okay, it looks cool, but the head animation right when he lands might be too fast. So in the graph editor, for frame 16, let's smooth out the curves a bit so the head action is not too sharp. Okay, that looks better. Let's make his left hand tighter on the swing back. Right now it's kind of loose, so let's make it into a fist. Frame 21 is a good place to make it a fist. Looking at the dope sheet, we can see that we have no keys for the left hand fingers at frame 21, so let's just turn it into a fist. But I do want some type of animation in the hand, so let's make his hand open before it turns into a fist. So say at frame 12, we open up his hand. Okay, the left hand looks smooth now. Let's put more action in the left hand. First, I want to make sure I still have a fist at frame 45, so key the fingers into a fist. Now let's go back to frame 26 and open up the fingers since the hand just swung back. Okay, let's angle the hand to give it an aerodynamic pose. Now I want to give more time between the fist at frame 21 and the open hand at frame 26. Let's delete the fist for now and just play around a bit. Now between keyframe 12 and 26, there's not much hand animation going on. So at frame 12, I want the fingers to be in a more neutral semi-closed hand. At frame 21, I want to smooth out the hand animation. Let's do that in the graph editor. cool. We get some nice follow-through action here in the hand. Let's put even more follow-through in the fingers. We could do that easily by sliding the finger keyframes over a few frames. Let's say frame 31. It looked better before, but I like the speed in which it closes to a fist here. So select the fist keyframe in the dope sheet also. Okay, that's cool. The follow-through is better, and we can see the fist for a longer period of time. He seems a little light in the squat pose, so let's sink him down a bit towards the end of the squat. Right now I'm just looking at the height of the hips throughout these keyframes. Let's delete the keyframe for the hips at frame 21. First, make sure frame 45 is keyed for the hips. Now delete frame 21. Now make sure it is only for the hip joint and not any other bones below the hierarchy. We don't want to lose anything else. Okay, the hip motion looks pretty smooth and pretty solid now. The last thing I want to do is make the kick more snappy. It still looks a little too slow for my taste. So we can easily do this by selecting all the keys at the end and shift back by one frame. I think one frame should do it. And yep, the kick is more powerful now. It's more of a popping motion. And there you have it. That was the second pass and the polishing pass of our animation. And now here's the final rendered animation. It has more life, it has more energy, more style than before, and it's all done. So that wasn't so bad, was it? Nah. Alright, I'll see you guys next time.